Welcome to 19th century Willowbrook Village, located on the historic site of Newfield, Maine. As you walk the grounds of this special place, you're sure to feel as if you've been transported to a time and place more than a century ago. And you'll discover the series of events that led to the creation of Willowbrook Village. What was it like living in Newfield in the late 1800s and early 1900s? Imagine changes in technology happening so quickly, even the most flexible of minds find it hard to adapt. Small towns shrinking as citizens leave for better jobs in the cities. People enduring natural disasters and man-made catastrophes. Small family-run farms disappearing. Employees complaining about their bosses, wages, and work conditions. Families sending their men off to war. Sounds a lot like today, doesn't it? And the fact is, if you take the time to learn about the history of the late 19th century, you'll discover there are many parallels between the lives of people living then and now. And that's one of the things to keep in mind as you tour Willowbrook Village.
During the early 1800s, the typical American was a farmer, and work was assigned according to gender. Most men tended to the fields. Women did domestic work. Childhood really ends at the age of 5, 6, or 7. And from that point forward, most children were assumed to kind of assume the responsibilities and duplicate the working lives of their parents. In winter months, many farmers learned a trade. Some became loggers, some became shoemakers, some became skilled craftsmen. Over the course of the 19th century, Americans started to move inland, and they were enabled in this process by a transportation revolution. First, a kind of wave of canal building that really begins in the first 2 decades of the 19th century, and following up upon that was the rise of the railroad. With the rise of transportation networks, agriculture became regionally specialized, and much of the country's agriculture moved into the more fertile lands in the West. As a result, the kind of agricultural economy in New England became diminished somewhat.
The peak of the population here in Newfield was in the 1850 census, nearly 1,500 people here then. And there were, by that time, there had been quite a number of shops that were set up, particularly along the Little Ossipee River, but several here in this area around Willowbrook. There were sawmills, grist mills, blacksmith shops, carriage shops.
During the 1860s, Newfield sent many of its men off to fight in the Civil War. Having fewer men available on the farms encouraged the invention and development of new farm machinery. 19th century Americans had a fascination with machines and inventions. Everyone with a new or better gadget hoped to patent it and become wealthy. Between 1860 and 1890, American inventors registered nearly 500,000 patents, more than 10 times the number granted in all the years before 1860. Here at Willowbrook, you'll see what local people manufactured and invented: carriages, sleighs, and farm equipment.
Most of those carriage shops were located here in the Willowbrook area, or several of them. Abner Tellis was one who made really nice carriages and sleighs. Hugh Scott was another, and he was also a blacksmith. Near the site of Willowbrook's bandstand, there was a 3-story carriage shop. Around 1900, Amesbury, Massachusetts became the site of much carriage making. And this was more with machines and assembly lines. They could produce them much more cheaply than they could here in Newfield.
So, around 1900, local craftsmen were trying other businesses.
Among some of the things, they made shingles, wooden boxes. There were a few chicken crates made. But then cardboard came in. And cardboard boxes were much cheaper and easier to make. So no longer needed those.
During the 1930s, the number of farms and farmers in York County remained fairly stable. Many who lost industrial jobs during the Depression returned to part-time farming, preferring that to standing in food distribution lines. Then disaster struck York County. It was October 23, 1947. High winds whipped up forest fires that engulfed much of the region and burned nearly 70% of the area in Newfield. Nearly 100 structures were destroyed. Among the buildings spared were the William Durgin and Dr. Isaac Trafton homesteads. Willowbrook was founded by an entrepreneur by the name of Don King.
My dad, Don King, was actually the founder and the sole creator of Willowbrook. In 1951, he, with two other partners, founded a company named Lubrication Engineers. That company was based in Fort Worth, Texas, and they manufactured and marketed petroleum-based greases and oils. That was an incredibly successful company. In the early 60s, he looked around in southern Maine, not to found a museum or anything, but for a hunting lodge location, and he ended up buying the Durgin property. He loved to talk to people, he loved to meet people, and he found that just a lot of stuff from the area was being lost. Farms were being broken up, sold off, things carted off to the dump, and he started collecting things. By about 67, he decided that he would actually start restoring some of the things and showing them to people in the area. In 1968, he bought the Trafton property. The collection began to grow rather significantly at that time, and he decided rather than to just open a barn, he would open several buildings. And in May of 1970, the museum was opened. My father's philosophy, in his own words, was to restore to the day of manufacture. As we feel the people of the 19th century used and took great care of their possessions. They did not live in shabby homes or ride in worn-out, junky wagons.
As awareness of Mr. King's collection and interest spread, many local families realized that Willowbrook was a place where they could preserve their family's heirlooms. They donated their prized possessions to be displayed for the enjoyment of others. One of the most significant donations to Willowbrook was the 1894 Armitage Herschel Carousel from I.H. Fenderson V of Saco, Maine.
This Mr. Fenderson approached him one day and said, "Would you be interested in a carousel my father owned?" And Mr. King said yes, but thinking way back in his mind, whoa, what's it going to cost me to this restoration after he saw it? But he took it, and we stored it, and we worked on it for 14 years, slowly. Each winter we did maybe 2 or 4 horses and a carriage or whatever. It was a lot of hard work. This is my favorite thing of all of Willowbrook.
Don King continued to add to and restore his collection until he died in 1985 at the age of 71. Then his wife, Pan, assumed her husband's role at the museum. She died in 2003 at the age of 89. Over 90% of Willowbrook's collection was acquired from within 100 miles of Newfield, a region including parts of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. A collection of Ferber pumps came to the museum with the help of board member Don Kopp, who met Dorothy Ferber.
It goes way back to the late 1700s when the original Ferbers were itinerant wooden pump manufacturers, and they would travel from farm to farm and install wooden pumps for the farmers, which at that time was considered a great labor-saving device over having to drop the bucket into the well and pull it up by hand. Dorothy learned that I knew Don King, who had founded this museum, and she told me that many of the tools and the products of the company, as they had evolved over the years, were up in the attic of her big barn at her home in Buxton. And she wondered whether Don King might be interested in seeing those for his museum. I talked to him and he said he was, and I remember very clearly the day that I introduced the two of them at her barn. They were like kids in a candy store, and Dorothy would pick up a tool and she would say, "Oh, this is for," and then Don King would finish the sentence. After we climbed down from the barn and said goodbye to Dorothy, we were walking to our cars, and I stopped and I said to him, I said, "Don, why do you do this?" And he looked at me as if I'd asked the stupidest question in the world, and he said, "Because it's so much fun."
So, what can we learn from history? The people who carry on Don King's legacy here at Willowbrook say there's a lot we can learn.
I think that there's a lot of ways that what we're going through today relates to what people went through 100 years, 150 years ago. Even though we have different technology, they were still experiencing a lot of changes in technology, changes in their lives. And I think it's important for people to understand what happened before. People can make personal connections to events and things from the past and people. And it helps them to understand why we do things the way we do today, why things are the way they are.
19th Century Willowbrook Village is a nonprofit organization with properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This 501c3 raises its operating expenses through sales in its shops, admissions, membership fees, and grants. Willowbrook relies heavily on financial donations from its supporters. Help preserve and support 19th Century Willowbrook Village by telling a friend about us, becoming a member, making a donation, and/or volunteering today. Throughout the season, you can enjoy a wide variety of events and activities here. As you begin your visit, here are a few things to keep in mind. Willowbrook's buildings are clearly marked with the names and numbers indicated on the visitor's guide and map. The museum is surrounded by private residences, so please respect our neighbors' privacy. As you cross the street from one side of the museum to the other, watch for fast-moving traffic.
Building 7, I run the carousel 3 times a day.
Our friendly staff in the country store, the shop at Willowbrook, and the sandwich shop will be happy to answer your questions. Candy from your childhood, dill pickles in a barrel, sharp cheddar cheese, and a variety of hard-to-find kitchen gadgets are available at our country store. Tasty wraps, soups and salads, burgers and hot dogs are available in the sandwich shop. Frosty ice cream treats may be had at the ice cream parlor. No visit is complete without a stop at the shop at Willowbrook. You'll find books about the 19th century, unique gifts, wooden toys, and more. Enjoy peaceful views while sitting on benches and chairs located throughout the museum. Bathrooms may be found in the Durgin Barn, the shop at Willowbrook, and the sandwich shop. Enjoy your visit with us today. We hope to see you again soon. 19th Century Willowbrook Village, the way life used to be.